An 8-year-old girl was told never to open the basement door, but when she did, what she found beneath those stone steps wasn't just hidden treasure. It was $295 million in stolen history that powerful men had killed to keep secret. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash that subscribe button because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and cream-colored, the kind that screamed expensive lawyer and bad news in equal measure. Sarah Bennett stood in the narrow hallway of her cramped apartment, still wearing yesterday's clothes, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the kitchen counter behind her. Her daughter Emma sat cross-legged on the threadbare carpet, 8 years old with wild brown curls and eyes too curious for her own good, building a tower out of mismatched blocks. Sarah turned the envelope over in her hands. The return address was from Whitmore and Associates, a law firm in upstate New York she'd never heard of. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore it open. The letter inside was brief, formal, and utterly bewildering. Dear Miss Bennett, we regret to inform you of the passing of Margaret Foster, your maternal great-aunt. As the sole surviving heir, you are requested to attend the reading of her will at our offices on Friday, November 18th at 10 o'clock in the morning. Please bring identification and any relevant family documentation. Sarah read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Margaret Foster. She'd heard the name exactly twice in her entire life, both times from her mother before she passed away 6 years ago. Her mother had mentioned an eccentric aunt who'd disappeared into some grand house upstate decades ago, cutting off all family ties, living like a ghost in a mansion no one ever visited. Mama? Emma looked up from her blocks. What's wrong? Sarah forced a smile, folding the letter carefully. Nothing, baby. Just some mail about a relative I barely knew. But it wasn't nothing. 3 days later, Sarah called in sick to work, something she could barely afford to do as a paralegal at a firm that treated her like replaceable furniture, and drove 4 hours north with Emma buckled in the back seat, singing off-key to the radio. The law offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the second floor of a building that looked older than the town itself, all dark wood and brass fixtures that gleamed with old money polish. The receptionist, a woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, barely glanced at Sarah's jeans and worn jacket before ushering them into a conference room. The space smelled like leather and lemon oil. Emma pressed her nose against the tall window, watching pigeons huddle on the ledge outside. Miss Bennett! The voice came from the doorway, deep and measured. A man stepped inside, tall and angular, somewhere in his 70s with sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. I'm Jonathan Whitmore. Thank you for coming. Sarah shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional, but his eyes held something else. Concern, maybe, or warning. I'll be direct, Whitmore said, settling into a leather chair and opening a thick folder. Your great-aunt Margaret Foster passed away 4 weeks ago at the age of 93. She died in her home, peacefully, according to the medical examiner. She left behind considerable assets, all of which she has bequeathed to you as her only living blood relative. Sarah's throat went dry. I don't understand. I never even met her. No, but she knew of you. She kept track. Whitmore pulled out a photograph, slid it across the polished table. It showed Sarah at Emma's 5th birthday party, blowing out candles. Sarah's hands went cold. How had Margaret gotten this? The estate consists primarily of a property known as Hollow Crest Manor, located approximately 45 minutes from here in the town of Ravenswood. The house sits on 17 acres. There are also some financial assets, though modest, roughly $32,000 in a checking account, some bonds. Sarah's mind reeled. A house, land, $32,000. It was more than she'd ever had in her life. There's something else, Whitmore continued, and now his voice dropped lower. Before she died, Margaret left very specific instructions. I'm required to deliver them to you verbally, as a condition of the inheritance. He paused, glanced at Emma, who was now drawing on a notepad the receptionist had given her. She said, and I quote, "Tell Sarah the house is hers to do with as she wishes, but she must never, under any circumstances, allow the child to enter the basement. The door must remain locked. What's down there is not meant for innocent eyes. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt her skin prickle. "That's it?" she asked. "That's the instruction?" "That's it." Whitmore closed the folder. "Unusual, I know, but legally binding as a condition of inheritance. If you violate it, the estate reverts to the state." Sarah looked at Emma, humming softly as she drew. "What's in the basement?" "I don't know," Whitmore said. "Margaret never told me. I've never been inside the house. She was extremely private. The only other person who had access was Thomas Gray, her estate executor. He'll meet you at the property to hand over the keys." An hour later, Sarah signed papers she barely understood, her hand cramping from all the initials and signatures. When they finally left, the afternoon sun was already sinking low, painting the old buildings in shades of amber and rust. "Mama," Emma said as they climbed back into the car, "are we going to live in a mansion?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at those bright eyes full of dreams. "Maybe, baby. We'll see." The drive to Ravenswood took them deeper into the countryside, past farms and forests that seemed to swallow the light. The GPS led them down a winding road lined with stone walls and overgrown hedges, until finally, through a gap in the trees, Sarah saw it. Hollowcrest Manor rose from the hillside like something out of a Gothic novel, all grey stone and tall windows, turrets and chimneys reaching toward the darkening sky. Ivy climbed the walls. The front steps were wide and cracked. Several windows were shuttered. It looked like the kind of place where secrets went to hide. A man stood at the base of the steps, hands in the pockets of a long wool coat. He was old, probably in his 80s, with white hair and a face carved by time into deep lines. When Sarah pulled up, he stepped forward slowly, moving like someone whose bones hurt. "Sarah Bennett?" His voice was rough, like gravel in a tin can. "Yes, you must be Thomas Gray." He nodded once, then looked at Emma, who'd jumped out of the car and was staring up at the house with her mouth open. "This is my daughter Emma." Thomas's expression shifted, something dark passing behind his eyes. "She's young. She's 8. He looked back at the house, jaw working. "Did Whitmore give you Margaret's message?" "About the basement?" "Yes." Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out an iron keyring holding dozens of keys, all different sizes and shapes. He pressed them into Sarah's palm, his hand lingering just a moment too long. "Listen to me," he said, voice dropping low. "Margaret Foster was my friend for 52 years. I loved her like a sister, and she was terrified in the end, terrified of what might happen if the wrong person got into that basement." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What's down there?" "I don't know. She never let me see. But I trust her judgment." He looked directly at Emma now. "Keep the child away. I mean it. There are things in this world that can't be undone once they're seen." Emma, oblivious, had wandered toward the front door, running her small hand along the stone. "I'll keep her safe," Sarah said quietly. Thomas nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He turned and walked toward an old truck parked on the side of the driveway, then stopped and called back. "One more thing. If you need anything, call me. Don't trust anyone else in this town. Margaret had enemies. She never said why, but I could see it in the way people looked at this place." Then he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving Sarah and Emma standing in the shadow of the massive house. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. Sarah found a light switch, and old chandeliers flickered to life, revealing a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase, marble floors, and walls covered in faded wallpaper depicting peacocks and flowering vines. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like sleeping ghosts. Paintings hung in heavy frames, portraits of stern-faced people Sarah didn't recognize. "It's like a castle," Emma whispered, her voice echoing. They explored slowly, room by room. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, volumes so old the spines cracked when Sarah touched them. A dining room with a table that could seat 20. A kitchen with appliances from the 1950s. Upstairs, 7 bedrooms, each one filled with antique furniture and the smell of mothballs. but it was the door at the end of the first-floor hallway that caught Emma's attention. "Mama, what's that?" Sarah turned. The door was different from the others, made of heavy oak reinforced with iron bands. A massive padlock hung from the latch. "That's the basement," Sarah said, keeping her voice light. "We're not going down there. It's probably full of spiders and old junk." "But why is it locked?" "Because old houses have old basements, and they're not safe." Sarah steered Emma away back toward the kitchen. "Come on, let's see if we can get the water running." But even as they moved through the house, Sarah felt the pull of that door, the weight of Thomas's warning, the mystery of what Margaret had hidden away for so long. That night, they slept in one of the upstairs bedrooms, sharing a massive four-poster bed. Sarah had found linens in a closet, still sealed in plastic. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the long day, but Sarah lay awake, listening to the house settle around them. It creaked and groaned like a living thing. Pipes rattled, wind whistled through gaps in the windows, and somewhere, far below, Sarah thought she heard something else, a sound she couldn't quite place. Not footsteps, but a low rhythmic thump, like something heavy being moved. She sat up, heart pounding. The house was silent again. Just her imagination, she told herself. Old houses made noise, that's all it was. But she didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Sarah stood in the driveway with her phone, calling her supervisor to quit her job. The woman on the other end didn't even sound surprised, just irritated that she'd have to find someone else to do Sarah's work for half the pay. "You sure about this?" her supervisor asked. "You're giving up a steady paycheck." Sarah looked at the mansion, at 17 acres of land that could be sold, at the possibility of finally having enough. "I'm sure," she said, and hung up. Emma spent the morning exploring the grounds, chasing squirrels and picking wildflowers that had overgrown the gardens. Sarah began going through the house more systematically, opening drawers and cabinets, trying to get a sense of who Margaret Foster had been. She found photographs in a desk in the library, black and white images of a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes. Margaret in her 20s, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Margaret in her 30s, shaking hands with men in military uniforms. Margaret in her 40s, holding what looked like an ancient vase. There were letters too, dozens of them, written in multiple languages. Sarah couldn't read most of them, but she recognized some names in the signatures. Museum directors, university professors, government officials. What had Margaret done for a living? The house was full of artifacts, strange objects from around the world. A jade statue on the mantel, a Persian rug so old it was nearly threadbare, paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. Sarah was examining a bronze sculpture when Emma's voice echoed from somewhere downstairs. "Mama, come look!" Sarah found her in the hallway, standing in front of the basement door. "Emma, I told you to stay away from there." "But look!" Emma pointed to the floor. Something had been slid under the door, a piece of paper yellowed with age. Sarah picked it up carefully. Written in shaky handwriting were 3 words. "Protect the collection." Her blood ran cold. Who had put this here? She tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. Through the gap at the bottom, she could see only darkness. "Come on," Sarah said, pulling Emma away. "Let's go into town. We need groceries." Ravenswood was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stood out like blood on snow. The general store clerk watched them with barely concealed curiosity as Sarah loaded a cart with basics. Emma picked out a box of cereal shaped like stars. "You're the one who inherited the Foster place," the clerk said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Did you know Margaret?" The woman's expression shuttered. Everyone knew of her, kept to herself mostly, came into town maybe once a month for supplies, never talked much. "What did she do? For work, I mean." "Couldn't say." The clerk rang up their items, hands moving mechanically. "But I'll tell you this. People came around sometimes, asking about her. Men in suits, foreign types. She always sent them away." Sarah loaded the bags into her car, that uneasy feeling settling deeper into her bones. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to fall into a routine. She cleaned the house, room by room, uncovering furniture and washing windows. Emma helped, singing as she worked, turning it into a game. But at night, when Emma was asleep, Sarah found herself drawn back to that locked door. She'd stand in front of it, keyring in hand, sorting through the dozens of keys. One of them had to fit the padlock. But every time she got close, she remembered Thomas's words, remembered Margaret's warning, remembered the way Whitmore had looked at Emma. Keep the child away. But why? What could possibly be down there that was so dangerous? On the fifth night, Sarah woke to find Emma's side of the bed empty. Panic seized her immediately. She threw off the covers and ran into the hallway. "Emma!" a small voice called from downstairs. "I'm here, Mama." Sarah found her standing in front of the basement door, wearing her pajamas with the purple unicorns, one hand pressed against the wood. "Emma, what are you doing?" "I heard something." Emma looked up at her, eyes wide and earnest. "Someone was knocking." Sarah's skin went cold. "No one's down there, baby. It's just the house settling." "But I heard them. They were knocking like this." Emma rapped her knuckles against the door 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. "Come on." Sarah scooped her up, even though Emma was getting too big for it. "Back to bed." But as they climbed the stairs, Sarah could have sworn she heard it. 3 soft knocks from below. 3 more. Then silence. The next morning, Thomas Gray appeared at the door. His face was grey, drawn with worry. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Alone." Sarah sent Emma outside to play, then led Thomas into the library. He sat heavily in one of the leather chairs, hands gripping his knees. "Something's happened," he said. "Yesterday a man came to see me, said he was a collector, interested in Margaret's estate, wanted to know if anything was being sold." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to get lost. But Sarah, this is what I was afraid of. Word's getting out. People know you're here now." He leaned forward. "There are things about Margaret's past that I can't fully explain because she never told me everything. But I know she spent most of her life acquiring things. Important things. Dangerous things." "What kind of things?" "I don't know. Art, maybe. Artifacts. Documents. She traveled constantly until about 10 years ago. Always came back with crates and cases. Everything went into that basement." He paused. "She told me once that if the wrong people knew what she had, they'd kill for it." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Are you saying people might come here, looking for it?" "I'm saying you need to be careful, very careful. And for God's sake, keep that child away from the basement. Whatever's down there, Margaret died protecting it. She made me swear I'd pass that protection on to you." After Thomas left, Sarah stood at the window and watched Emma chase butterflies across the overgrown lawn. Sunshine turned her curls to copper. She looked so small against the vastness of the estate, so innocent. What had Sarah gotten them into? That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. She kept thinking about Margaret, about a woman who'd spent her whole life collecting secrets, who died alone in this massive house with no one but Thomas to mourn her. What kind of life was that? She got up and went downstairs, drawn once again to the basement door. This time, she didn't stop herself. She sorted through the keys until she found one that looked old enough, large enough. Her hands shook as she fitted it into the padlock. It turned. The lock clicked open. Sarah stood there, breathing hard, staring at the door. All she had to do was pull it open. All she had to do was look. But Emma's face flashed in her mind, those bright, curious eyes, that innocent trust. Sarah locked the padlock again and went back upstairs. The warnings had been clear, the danger was real, and whatever lay beneath those stone steps would have to stay buried, at least for now. But in the master bedroom, tucked into the back of Margaret's jewelry box beneath tarnished necklaces and old brooches, a small brass key waited. A key Emma would find while playing dress-up in her great-great-aunt's clothes. A key that would change everything. The brass key was no bigger than Emma's thumb, hidden beneath a tangle of costume jewelry in the bottom drawer of Margaret's vanity. Emma had been playing dress-up, draping herself in silk scarves that smelled like old perfume and trying on hats with feathers that tickled her nose. She'd discovered the vanity on a rainy afternoon 2 weeks after they'd moved in, and it had become her favorite treasure chest. But this key was different from the others she'd found. It was warm to the touch, as if someone had just been holding it. And etched into the brass were 3 words so tiny Emma had to squint to read them. Vault Access 1. She turned it over in her small hands, watching how the afternoon light caught the metal. Mama had so many keys now, dozens of them for all the different doors and cabinets throughout the house. But Emma had never seen this one on the big iron ring. This one had been hidden, deliberately tucked away where no one would think to look. Emma's heart beat faster. She knew about the basement door, knew Mama checked the padlock every night before bed, knew she'd been told 100 times to stay away, but standing there in Margaret's old bedroom with the key growing warmer in her palm, Emma felt something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just curiosity, it was more like a pull, a whisper in the back of her mind that said some secrets were meant to be found. She slipped the key into the pocket of her jeans. 3 days later, Sarah had to drive into town. A man from the county assessor's office needed her signature on property documents, and he'd insisted she come in person. Sarah had been hesitant to leave Emma alone, but the girl had seemed content with her coloring books and the promise of macaroni and cheese for lunch. "I'll be back in 2 hours," Sarah said, kneeling down to look Emma in the eye. "You stay inside. Don't answer the door for anyone. And Emma, I know, Mama. Stay away from the basement." Sarah kissed her forehead. "Good girl. I love you." "Love you too." Emma watched from the window as the car disappeared down the long driveway. Then she stood very still, listening to the silence of the house settle around her. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Somewhere upstairs, a shutter creaked. The house seemed to breathe, waiting. Emma walked slowly to the basement door. The padlock hung heavy and forbidding, but when she pulled the brass key from her pocket and held it up, she saw that this lock was different from the others, newer. And when she slid the key into the mechanism, it turned with a soft click that sounded almost like permission. The padlock fell open in her hands. Emma stood there for a long moment, heart hammering against her ribs. She could stop now. Could lock it back up, put the key away, pretend she'd never found it. Mama would never know. But the door was right there, and beyond it lay the one part of the house she'd been forbidden to see, the one mystery that had kept her awake at night, wondering. She pulled the door open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of stone and something else, something old and important like the inside of a museum. Stone steps descended into darkness, rough-hewn and ancient-looking, nothing like the polished marble of the rest of the house. Emma fumbled along the wall until her fingers found a light switch. With a click and a flicker, lights came on below. Not bright modern bulbs, but soft amber lights that cast everything in a golden glow. Emma took the first step down. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down and down into the earth. The temperature dropped with each step. Emma's breath came out in small white puffs. The walls on either side were bare stone, damp and cold to the touch. She counted as she descended, 20 steps, 30, 40. Finally, the stairs opened into a chamber so vast Emma gasped aloud. It wasn't a basement, it was a vault. The ceiling soared 15 feet overhead, supported by thick stone columns. The floor was smooth concrete, clean and dry despite the depth. And everywhere, there were things. Emma stood frozen, trying to take it all in. The chamber stretched out before her, divided into sections by carefully placed walls and archways. Soft lighting illuminated everything with an almost reverent glow. It felt like standing inside a secret palace buried beneath the earth. She moved forward slowly, her sneakers barely making a sound. The first section she entered made her stop and stare with her mouth open. Paintings covered the walls, massive canvases in ornate gold frames. Emma had been to museums on school field trips, had seen famous paintings in books, but these were different. These glowed with an intensity that seemed almost alive. A woman with a mysterious smile sat against a dark background. A field of sunflowers blazed with yellow fire. A night sky swirled with impossible stars. Emma walked from painting to painting, her neck craning back to see them all. Some showed scenes of battles and kings. Others captured simple moments, a girl reading a letter by a window, a bowl of fruit on a wooden table. Beside each painting was a small brass plaque. Emma read one. Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, Gustav Klimt, 1907. Recovered Vienna, 1998. Another. Starry Night over the Rhone, Vincent van Gogh, 1888. Recovered Paris, 2003. Recovered. The word repeated on every plaque. Not purchased, not inherited, recovered. Emma moved into the next chamber, and her breath caught again. Glass cases lined the walls, each one climate-controlled and carefully lit. Inside them lay objects that looked like they belonged in history books. Ancient Egyptian jewelry, collars of gold and turquoise, rings carved with hieroglyphs. Greek pottery painted with scenes of gods and heroes. Roman coins stamped with the faces of emperors. Medieval crowns studded with gems that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. Emma pressed her nose against one case and saw a dagger with a handle made of jade, its blade still sharp after what must have been hundreds of years. The plaque read, Ceremonial Blade, Aztec, 15th century, recovered Mexico City, 2001. In another case, a golden mask stared out with empty eyes. Funeral mask, Mycenaean, 16th century BCE, recovered Athens, 1995. Each object had a story written on its plaque. Each one had been lost and then found again, and Great-Aunt Margaret had found them all. Emma wandered deeper into the vault, barely able to process what she was seeing. An entire wall of ancient books, their spines cracked with age, protected behind glass. Scrolls in languages Emma didn't recognize. Maps drawn on animal skin showing coastlines that didn't match any globe she'd seen in school. The third chamber was different. It contained rows of filing cabinets, industrial and grey. And in the center, a large vault door stood open, revealing safety deposit boxes built into the walls. Emma approached cautiously. Some of the boxes had been pulled out, their contents visible. Stacks of old currency from countries Emma didn't know existed. Bearer bonds with numbers so large she couldn't count all the zeros. Stock certificates printed on heavy paper, dated from the 1920s and 30s. One box contained nothing but diamonds, loose stones that glittered like captured stars. Another held gold coins, pounds and pounds of them, stacked neatly. Emma's hands shook. She didn't know exactly what she was looking at, but she knew it was valuable. More valuable than anything she'd ever imagined. More valuable than the house, than the 17 acres, than everything. She turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the underground space. How long had it taken to build this? How long had Margaret spent bringing all these treasures here, one by one, hiding them from the world? And then Emma saw it, sitting on a small desk in the corner of the third chamber. A leather journal, its cover worn smooth with handling. Next to it sat a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Emma approached the desk carefully, as if sudden movements might make everything disappear. She opened the journal, and Margaret's handwriting flowed across the pages in neat, careful script. January 3rd, 1997. Retrieved the Caravaggio from a private collection in Brussels. The family didn't even know what they had. I've authenticated it. No question it's the original. Thought lost in 1945. Can't report it. The provenance trail leads through 3 Nazi officers and a theft from the Uffizi, bringing it home to the vault. Emma flipped forward. June 12, 2004. Tracked down the Cellini salt cellar to an estate sale in Munich. Paid $16,000 cash. It's worth $30 million at least. Stolen from Vienna in 2003. Police still looking for it. Can't come forward without implicating the seller's family, adding it to the collection. The entries went on and on, year after year. Each one detailed a recovery. Each one explained why Margaret couldn't return the piece, couldn't claim it, couldn't do anything but hide it away. March 21st, 2009. Found Da Vinci sketches in a monastery basement in Tuscany. The monks had no idea. Original owner murdered by Mussolini's soldiers in 1943. His grandchildren are still alive, but the legal complications would expose the monastery to prosecution for possession of stolen goods. Can't do that to them. Bringing the sketches home. Emma read faster, her eyes racing across the pages. Margaret's life unfolded in these entries. 50 years of travel, of searching, of tracking down art and artifacts that had been stolen, lost, or hidden. She'd worked with museums, with governments, with private investigators. She'd learned a dozen languages. She'd risked her life more than once. But she couldn't legally claim any of it. The items were too hot, too tangled in webs of theft and war and black market deals. To come forward with them would mean arrests, prosecutions, international incidents. Innocent people, descendants of victims, current holders who'd bought things in good faith, would be destroyed. So Margaret had built this vault, had brought everything here, had protected it all, waiting for a time when the legal complications might untangle, when the truth could come to light without destroying lives. Emma's fingers trembled as she turned to the final entry, dated just 2 months before Margaret's death. October 7th, 2024. I'm dying. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. I've spent my entire adult life recovering lost treasures, and now I'm leaving them all behind. 52 years of work, hundreds of pieces, some of the greatest art in human history, sitting in my basement because I couldn't figure out how to return them without causing more harm than good. I'm leaving everything to Sarah, my great-niece. I've watched her from afar, seen how she struggles, how she fights for her daughter. She's a good person, strong, ethical. Maybe she'll know what to do with this burden I'm passing on. Maybe she'll find a way where I couldn't. But the girl, Emma, she can't know, not yet. She's too young, too innocent. Once you see all this, once you know it exists, it changes you. The weight of it, the responsibility, the danger. Because there are people who've been looking for these pieces for decades. People who will kill to claim them. People who will stop at nothing. I've tried to protect this collection with my silence. Now Sarah must protect it with hers. And God help them both, because I'm about to make their lives infinitely more complicated. Emma closed the journal, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She looked around the vault with new eyes. This wasn't just treasure. This was responsibility. This was danger. What happens next will turn everything upside down, expose secrets that were never meant to see daylight, and prove that some 8-year-old girls are braver than the most powerful men in the world. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Emma heard it then, the sound of a car in the driveway above. Mama was home early. Panic seized her. She shoved the journal back onto the desk, but as she did, her elbow knocked against the wooden box. It fell, spilling its contents across the floor. Papers, dozens of them. Emma dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather them up. But one paper caught her eye, an envelope addressed to The Finder in Margaret's handwriting. Emma grabbed it, shoved the rest of the papers back into the box, and ran for the stairs. She was halfway up when she heard Sarah's voice calling from above. "Emma, where are you?" Emma's mind raced. She couldn't let Mama know she'd been down here, couldn't let her see the open door. She reached the top of the stairs, breathing hard, and pushed the door shut behind her. But the padlock, she'd left it hanging open. "Emma!" "Here, Mama!" Emma called, her voice coming out higher than normal. "I'm here!" Sarah appeared at the end of the hallway, grocery bags in her arms. Her eyes went immediately to the basement door, then to Emma standing in front of it, then to the open padlock in Emma's hand. The grocery bags hit the floor. "What did you do?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I found a key and I just wanted to see—" "You went down there." Sarah grabbed Emma's shoulders. "Tell me you didn't go down there." Emma couldn't lie. Not to her mother. Not about this. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. For a long moment, Sarah just stared at her. Then she looked at the basement door, then back at Emma. Something flickered across her face. Fear, anger, but also something else. Curiosity. "Show me," Sarah said quietly. "But you said—" I know what I said. Show me. Emma led her mother down the stairs. With each step, she watched Sarah's face change. The fear gave way to shock. The shock gave way to awe. By the time they reached the bottom, Sarah had stopped breathing entirely. She walked into the first chamber like someone in a trance, stood in front of the paintings, touched the frame of one, then jerked her hand back as if it had burned her. "This can't be real," she whispered. "These can't be real." But they were. Emma had read the journal, had seen the authentication papers. These were the missing masterpieces, the lost treasures, the pieces that museums around the world listed as stolen or destroyed. Sarah moved through the chambers like a sleepwalker. Emma followed silently, watching her mother process the impossible. When they reached the third chamber and Sarah saw the filing cabinets, the safety deposit boxes, the literal piles of wealth, she sat down hard on the floor. "How much?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "How much is all this worth?" Emma remembered one of Margaret's journal entries. The last inventory was $295 million. That was 3 years ago. Sarah's hands went to her face. For a minute, Emma thought she might cry. But when Sarah looked up, her eyes were clear. "Where did you learn that?" Emma handed her the journal. Sarah read in silence, flipping through pages, her expression growing more troubled with each entry. When she finished, she sat holding the leather book like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "This is stolen," she said finally. "All of it. Stolen." "No," Emma said quickly. "Margaret recovered it. She found things that had been stolen and brought them here to protect them. But she didn't return them. She couldn't. It says why. The legal stuff was too complicated. People would have gotten hurt." Sarah stood up, paced the length of the chamber. "This isn't ours, Emma. We can't keep it. We can't sell it. This is evidence, history. It belongs to museums, to the families who lost it." "I know," Emma said quietly. "That's what Margaret thought too. That's why she hid it." Sarah turned to look at the paintings, at the artifacts, at the sheer magnitude of what her great-aunt had spent a lifetime collecting. "What are we supposed to do with this?" "I don't know, Mama." They stood together in the silence of the vault, surrounded by centuries of human creativity and tragedy. Emma slipped her hand into Sarah's. "There's more," Emma said, pulling out the envelope she'd grabbed. "I found this. It's addressed to whoever found this place." Sarah took it with shaking hands and tore it open. Inside was a letter, several pages long. She read it aloud, her voice growing steadier as she went. "To whoever finds this collection, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered my life's work. I don't know if you're Sarah, my great-niece, or someone else, but I pray you're someone with integrity, someone who will do what I couldn't. My name is Margaret Foster. For 52 years, I worked as an art recovery specialist. My job was to track down pieces stolen during wars, by thieves, by corrupt collectors. I worked with governments, with Interpol, with museums and private investigators around the world. I was good at it. Too good, perhaps. The problem with recovery work is that sometimes you find things too complicated to return through legal channels. A painting stolen by Nazis but currently owned by a family who bought it legitimately in 1970. Who do you give it to? The descendant of the Jewish family who lost it? The current owner who paid fair price? The museum that had it before the war? Answer wrong, and lawsuits fly. Families are destroyed. Innocent people go to prison for possession of stolen goods they didn't know were stolen. Governments use it as ammunition for political battles. The art itself becomes damaged in the process, sold at auction to pay legal fees or seized and locked away in evidence rooms where no one can see it. So I made a choice. I would recover these pieces, authenticate them, and keep them safe until a time when they could be returned without causing more harm than good. I built this vault. I spent everything I had protecting these treasures. But I'm an old woman now, old and tired and dying. And I'm leaving you with an impossible burden. This collection represents some of humanity's greatest achievements. It's also evidence of some of our greatest crimes: theft, murder, genocide. Every piece has a story, and most of those stories involve tragedy. There are people who've been searching for some of these pieces for decades. Collectors who will pay any price. Criminals who will kill for them. Governments who will seize them. If word gets out that this vault exists, your life will be in danger. People will come. They will threaten you. They may harm you. But you also have an opportunity to do what I couldn't. Find a way to return these pieces to their rightful owners, or at least to places where the public can appreciate them. Museums, universities, places of learning and beauty. I've included documentation for everything: provenance papers, authentication certificates, correspondence with various authorities. It's all in the filing cabinets. Everything you need to prove what these pieces are and where they came from. What you do with this information is up to you. You could call the police, but be prepared for years of legal battles. You could contact museums, but some of these institutions have been complicit in illegal acquisitions. You could sell things privately, but that makes you no better than the thieves who stole them in the first place. Or you could do what I believe is right. Find a way to create a foundation, a trust, something that can properly handle the return of these pieces while protecting everyone involved. I know it's not fair. I know I'm dumping a lifetime of problems into your lap. But I also know that sometimes the right person comes along at exactly the right time. Maybe that's you. I've included a list of people you can trust. Thomas Gray, my executor, is one of them. There are others, lawyers, art experts, museum directors who are honest. Use them. Don't try to handle this alone. And please, please be careful. There's a reason I warned you to keep the child away from this place. Once she knows, she can never unknow. Once the world knows this exists, there's no going back to normal life. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for this burden. I'm sorry I couldn't solve this problem myself. I'm sorry your life is about to get infinitely more complicated. But I'm also grateful. Grateful that someone found this. Grateful that maybe, finally, these pieces will see the light of day again. Use your best judgment. Trust your instincts. And whatever you do, don't let greed make your decisions. These pieces are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but they're worth infinitely more than money. They're human heritage. They belong to all of us. Good luck. You're going to need it. Margaret Foster, October 7th, 2024. Sarah finished reading and let the letter fall to her lap. Tears streamed down her face. Mama? Emma touched her arm gently. What are we going to do? Sarah looked at her daughter, at this brave, curious 8-year-old who'd broken the rules and stumbled into the discovery of a lifetime. Then she looked around the vault at the impossible responsibility that was now theirs. I don't know yet, Sarah said honestly, but we can't keep this secret. Margaret was right. These things need to be returned to people who can appreciate them, who have a right to them. But she also said it was dangerous. I know. Sarah pulled Emma close. Which is why we have to be smart about this. Very smart. Emma nestled against her mother's side. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I went into the basement. Sarah kissed the top of her head. I'm not. You found what Margaret wanted found. You're braver than I am. They sat together in the golden light of the vault, surrounded by treasures that had been hidden in darkness for decades. Above them, the house creaked and settled. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon. And somewhere out there in cities and countries around the world, people were still searching for these pieces, still hoping, still hunting. The secret was out now, at least between them. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that made her stomach clench, that everything was about to change. Margaret had spent 52 years protecting this collection in silence. Now Sarah and Emma had maybe days, maybe weeks before someone came looking, before word got out that the reclusive Margaret Foster had died and left behind something extraordinary. Come on, Sarah said, standing up and pulling Emma to her feet. Let's go back upstairs. We need to call Thomas, and then we need to figure out who else we can trust. As they climbed the stone steps back toward the light, Emma looked back one more time at the vault spreading out below them. $295 million worth of stolen history. 52 years of one woman's secret crusade. And now it was theirs. The weight of it settled onto her small shoulders. But Emma stood straighter, walked taller. Because Margaret had been right about one thing. Sometimes the right person comes along at exactly the right time. And maybe, just maybe, an 8-year-old girl and her mother were exactly the right people for this impossible task. Sarah sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, her phone clutched in her hand, staring at a contact she hadn't called in 3 years. David Chen. They'd worked together at the paralegal firm before he'd gone to law school and eventually opened his own practice in Boston. He'd been a good friend once, the kind who'd covered for her when Emma was sick and she couldn't afford to miss work. She pressed dial before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. "Sarah, do you know what time it is?" "I need help, David. Legal help. The kind that stays confidential." Silence. Then she heard rustling, the sound of him sitting up. "What kind of trouble are you in?" "The complicated kind. Can we talk attorney-client privilege, even if I'm not officially hiring you yet?" "Yes. Talk to me." Sarah took a deep breath and told him everything. The inheritance, the mansion, the basement vault filled with stolen art worth hundreds of millions. Margaret's journal and letter. The impossible choice now sitting in her lap. David didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for so long she thought the call had dropped. "David? I'm here. I'm just—" "Jesus, Sarah, this is beyond complicated. This is international law, restitution claims, cultural property legislation, criminal possession of stolen goods. You need specialists, multiple specialists. I need someone I trust, someone who won't immediately call the FBI or the press or try to take advantage." "The FBI should be your first call," David said firmly. "The art crime team handles exactly this kind of thing. If you come forward voluntarily, cooperate fully, you'll have legal protection. But if someone else reports it first, and you've been sitting on it—" "I know. But Margaret's letter said some of these pieces are so tangled up legally that coming forward could hurt innocent people. Current owners who bought in good faith. Families who don't want their names dragged through the media." David sighed. "Then you need to document everything. Every single piece, its provenance, how Margaret acquired it, when, from whom. Build a complete record before anyone else gets involved. That way you control the narrative." "How long do I have?" "If you're lucky, a week before someone notices unusual activity at the property. If you're unlucky, someone already knows." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Margaret Foster was on watch lists, Sarah. Art crime databases. Interpol has files on recovery specialists. When she died, her name would have been flagged. Various agencies will have noted it. Some might already be monitoring the property, waiting to see what happens to her assets." Sarah looked toward the hallway where Emma slept upstairs. "So we're already being watched?" "Possibly. My advice? Start documenting immediately. Take photographs, catalog everything, back it up in multiple locations including cloud storage. Then reach out to the FBI art crime team proactively. Frame it as a voluntary disclosure from a good faith inheritor who wants to do the right thing. And if I can't get protection for the current owners Margaret was trying to shield, then you'll have to decide what matters more, following the letter of the law or honoring your great-aunt's intentions. But Sarah, be very careful. People kill for collections like this. They really do." After they hung up, Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the rest of the night in the vault with her phone, photographing every painting, every artifact, every document. Emma found her at dawn, eyes red-rimmed and fingers cramping, sitting surrounded by file folders. "Did you sleep at all?" Emma asked. "Couldn't. We need to document everything before—" The doorbell rang. They both froze. The doorbell never rang. The house was 45 minutes from town, hidden behind trees at the end of a long private drive. No one just dropped by. Sarah grabbed Emma's hand and moved cautiously toward the front door. Through the beveled glass, she could see a man in an expensive suit standing on the porch, hands clasped patiently. She cracked the door open. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Bennett, my name is Marcus Volkov. I'm a private acquisitions consultant. I've come to make you an offer you'll find quite generous." "I'm not interested in selling anything." "You haven't heard my offer." His accent was faint, but definitely Eastern European. $10 million, cash, for the entire estate, including all contents. No inspections, no appraisals, no questions. I can have the funds wired today. Sarah's grip on the doorframe tightened. How did you know to come here? Word travels in certain circles, Miss Bennet. Margaret Foster was well known to collectors. When she passed, we all wondered what would become of her private collection. There is no collection. Volkov's smile widened. Of course not. My mistake. But should you discover anything of value during your time here, my offer stands. In fact, I'll double it. 20 million. For everything. Get off my property. Miss Bennet, please understand, I'm one of the reasonable ones. Others who come won't be so polite. 20 million would set you and your daughter up for life. No complications, no authorities, no questions about provenance or legal ownership. Sarah started to close the door, but Volkov put his foot in the gap. Think about it, he said quietly. Think about your little girl, about keeping her safe. Some secrets are dangerous to know. Sarah shoved the door hard, forcing him to step back. She slammed it and threw the deadbolt. Through the window, she watched him walk calmly to a black Mercedes and drive away. Emma looked up at her with wide eyes. Who was that? Trouble, Sarah said. Get your coat. We're going to Thomas's house. Thomas Gray lived in a small cottage on the other side of Ravenswood, a tidy place with flower boxes and a vegetable garden. When he opened the door and saw Sarah's face, he immediately ushered them inside. Someone came, Sarah said without preamble. Offered me 20 million for the collection. Knew exactly what was in the house. Thomas's face went grey. How long ago? 20 minutes. Then we don't have much time. They'll have people watching now. Once Volkov knows for certain what's there, others will come. Worse ones. He moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Margaret feared this, feared what would happen when she was gone and couldn't protect the collection anymore. Who is he? Marcus Volkov, black market art dealer. He's been trying to get into Margaret's vault for 30 years. She outwitted him at every turn, but now... Thomas turned back to them. You need federal protection, today. I called a lawyer. He said the same thing. Then do it. Call the FBI. Tell them everything. It's the only way to keep you safe. But before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Miss Bennet, this is Special Agent Rachel Morrison with the FBI Art Crime Team. We need to meet. Today, if possible. Sarah's stomach dropped. How did you get this number? We've been monitoring the Foster estate since Margaret's death. We know about Marcus Volkov's visit this morning. We also know there are at least 3 other interested parties currently in Ravenswood. Your window for safe cooperation is closing rapidly. What do you want from me? The truth. Full cooperation. Access to whatever Margaret left behind. In exchange, we can offer protection, legal immunity for good faith inheritance, and help navigating the restitution process. Sarah looked at Thomas, who nodded, then at Emma, who was trying to be brave but couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Where do you want to meet? The Ravenswood police station, 2 o'clock. Bring any documentation you have. After the call ended, Sarah sat down heavily. This is really happening. Yes, Thomas said, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Margaret's collection represents lost pieces from dozens of countries, hundreds of families. When word gets out, and it will, you'll have everyone from Holocaust survivors to Greek governments to private museums demanding access. Some claims will be legitimate, others won't be. Sorting through it all will take years. I just wanted to give Emma a better life, Sarah whispered. I never asked for this. Emma climbed into her lap. It's okay, Mama. We'll figure it out. Margaret did it for 52 years. We can do it too. The meeting with Agent Morrison lasted 4 hours. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, accompanied by 2 other agents and a lawyer from the Justice Department. Sarah told them everything, showed them Margaret's journal and letter, explained how Emma had found the vault. She expected judgment, accusations of withholding evidence. Instead, Morrison looked almost relieved. You did the right thing coming forward, Morrison said. Most people in your position try to hide it or sell pieces off quietly. That always ends badly. This way, we can protect you while we sort through the legal mess. How bad is the legal mess? Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a list. Based on what you've described, we're looking at pieces stolen during World War II, the Yugoslav Wars, the Iraq War, various museum thefts over the past century. Multiple countries will have claims, dozens of families. Several pieces are on Interpol's most wanted art list. Margaret didn't steal them, Sarah said firmly. She recovered them. She was trying to protect them. We know. We've been tracking Margaret Foster's work for years. She was brilliant, but she operated in a grey area that made traditional law enforcement nervous. She'd find pieces, authenticate them, and then they'd disappear. We suspected she was stockpiling them somewhere, but we could never prove it or find where. Why didn't you just ask her? Morrison smiled faintly. We did, many times. She always said she was retired, that she didn't know anything about missing pieces. She was protecting something. Now we know what. So, what happens now? Now we secure the site. My team will move in, catalogue everything properly, and begin the authentication and restitution process. You'll maintain legal ownership as inheritor, but everything will be held in trust until we can determine proper disposition. And the people like Volkov? We'll handle them. You're a witness now, possibly a victim of intimidation. That puts you under federal protection if needed. Sarah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders, but then Emma tugged her sleeve. Mama, what about the families? The ones who lost things? Morrison looked at Emma with something like respect. Smart question. We'll work to identify rightful owners or heirs. Some pieces will go back to museums, some to private families. Some may end up in public trusts if ownership is too complicated to determine. And the ones that can't be returned? Those are harder. But there are protocols, international agreements. It won't be fast, but it will be fair. They were driving back to the mansion when Sarah noticed the car behind them. A dark SUV, keeping a consistent distance. She'd seen the same vehicle when they'd driven into town. We're being followed, she said quietly. Thomas, who'd insisted on coming with them, turned to look. Speed up. Let's see if they match. Sarah accelerated. The SUV did too, maintaining the gap. Her hands tightened on the wheel. They're not even trying to hide it, Thomas muttered. Turn here. Sarah took a sudden right down a side road. The SUV followed. Her heart hammered. Emma sat silent in the back seat, eyes wide. Head toward the police station, Thomas said. Let's see if they'll follow us there. But before they could reach the station, the SUV suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside them. The passenger window rolled down. Sarah braced for the worst, but instead of a weapon, she saw a woman with grey hair and kind eyes. Miss Bennett, the woman called over the sound of the engines. Please, I need to speak with you. It's about my family. Sarah slowed, confused. The SUV matched her speed. My name is Rebecca Hoffman. My grandmother's paintings are in your collection. I've been trying to find them for 40 years. Sarah pulled into an empty parking lot, the SUV following. When both vehicles stopped, the woman got out slowly, hands visible, clearly trying not to frighten them. I'm sorry for scaring you, Rebecca said. But when I heard about Margaret Foster's death, I had to come. My grandmother was Hannah Lieberman. She was a painter in Vienna before the war. The Nazis took everything. Her paintings were lost, all except 3 pieces that Margaret found in 1998. Sarah remembered seeing those paintings in the vault. Beautiful portraits of a family, dated 1937. Margaret contacted my mother back then, Rebecca continued. Said she'd found the paintings but couldn't return them yet because of legal complications with the Austrian government. She promised to keep them safe until it was possible. My mother died last year, still waiting. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face. I just want to see them, to know they still exist, to know my grandmother's work survived, even if everything else was destroyed. Sarah looked at Emma, then at Thomas, then back at Rebecca. "Come to the house," Sarah said. "I'll show you." The next few days were chaos. News leaked somehow, probably through the police station or Morrison's team, and suddenly the world knew about Margaret Foster's vault. The story spread like wildfire. Reclusive art specialist dies, leaves behind hundreds of millions in stolen treasures. Lost masterpieces found in New York basement. Private hoard could rewrite art history. The phone rang constantly. Journalists, lawyers, collectors, government officials. Sarah stopped answering. The FBI posted agents at the property, keeping reporters and gawkers at bay. But some people got through. Like the elderly Greek man who showed up with photographs of ancient pottery his family had owned for generations, stolen when the military junta came to power in 1967. Or the Iraqi art historian who wept when he saw Mesopotamian artifacts he thought had been destroyed during the war in 2003. Each visitor had a story. Each piece of art represented a family torn apart, a culture devastated, a history nearly lost. Sarah met them all, listened to their stories, watched Emma take notes in a small notebook like she was documenting everything for posterity. But not everyone who came was friendly. Late one night, Sarah woke to the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed Emma and hid in the bedroom closet, calling 911 while footsteps moved through the house below. "Basement," she heard a man's voice say. "Find the documents, the authentication papers. That's what he wants." "What about the woman and kid?" Volkov said don't hurt them unless necessary, but find those papers. Sarah held Emma tight, barely breathing, while the intruders searched. They heard furniture overturned, drawers ransacked, but the FBI had already moved most of the important documents. The men left empty-handed, cursing. Police arrived 10 minutes later. Sarah gave statements, but the intruders were long gone. "It's not safe here anymore," Thomas said the next morning, surveying the damage. "You need to leave. Stay somewhere else until this settles down." "I'm not leaving," Sarah said firmly. "This is my house. Margaret trusted me to protect this collection." "Margaret's dead. She can't tell you if she'd want you to risk your daughter's life." Emma, who'd been quiet through all of this, suddenly spoke up. "Great-Aunt Margaret was poisoned." Everyone turned to stare at her. "What?" Sarah asked. "I found something in her journal, the later entries. She wrote about getting sick, but she didn't think it was cancer. She thought someone was poisoning her. She wrote that she'd started to feel better when she stopped accepting food from a neighbor, but then it started again with the tea deliveries." Emma pulled out the journal, which she'd apparently been reading in secret. She pointed to an entry from September 15th, 2024. "Feeling worse again. The nausea, the headaches, the confusion, but only on the days after Mrs. Pemberton's tea deliveries. I've started sending them back unopened. We'll see if symptoms improve. If I'm right, then they know I'm close to something. They're trying to silence me before I can finish the documentation." Sarah felt cold horror wash over her. Margaret was murdered. "We don't know that for certain," Thomas said, but his voice shook. "Who's Mrs. Pemberton?" Morrison asked. She'd arrived within minutes of being called about the break-in. "Neighbor about 2 miles down the road," Thomas said. "Sweet old lady. Brought Margaret tea every week for years. I can't believe She might not have known," Morrison interrupted. "Someone could have been using her as an unwitting delivery system, adding something to the tea before it reached Margaret." "Then Margaret's death wasn't natural," Sarah said. "Someone killed her to get to this collection." Morrison's expression hardened. "Which means you're in more danger than we thought. Whoever it was, they're still out there, and they'll see you as standing between them and hundreds of millions of dollars." The phone rang again. Sarah almost didn't answer, but Thomas picked it up. "Hello? Yes, she's here." He covered the receiver. "It's someone claiming to be a former colleague of Margaret's. Says he needs to speak with you urgently." Sarah took the phone cautiously. "Hello? Miss Bennett, my name is Dr. Heinrich Müller. I worked with Margaret for 30 years recovering stolen art. I'm calling to warn you. The people who killed Margaret will come for you next." How do you know she was killed? Because I was her partner in documenting everything. We were preparing to go public with the collection, to find a way to return pieces properly. But someone found out. Someone with everything to lose if these pieces resurfaced. Who? I don't know names, but there's a network, collectors, dealers, even some government officials, who profit from keeping stolen art in circulation. They buy and sell pieces quietly, forging provenance, creating false histories. Margaret's collection threatened to expose decades of their work. Every piece she authenticated with proper documentation was proof of their crimes. Sarah's stomach churned. What am I supposed to do? Go public, immediately. Make the collection known to the world. Once it's out in the open, killing you serves no purpose. Right now, you're a secret that can be eliminated. Make yourself impossible to silence. The FBI is already involved. Good. But don't trust anyone completely. This network has infiltrated everything. Law enforcement, museums, government agencies. Margaret trusted the wrong person once. It cost her life. The line went dead. Sarah stood holding the phone, her mind reeling. Who could she trust? Morrison seemed genuine, but Mueller had said the network was everywhere. David was a friend, but he was also overwhelmed by the scope of this. Thomas had been Margaret's friend, but had he really not known about the tea deliveries? She looked at Emma, at this brave 8-year-old who'd stumbled into something so much bigger than either of them could have imagined. Mama, Emma touched her hand. What did he say? He said we need to tell everyone. Make the collection public so we're not a secret anymore. Then let's do that. It's not that simple, baby. Once we do that, we can't take it back. Our lives will never be private again. People will judge us, scrutinize us, maybe hate us. The town's already divided. Some people think we should keep everything quiet, that Margaret was a thief. Others think we should donate it all immediately. Everyone has an opinion. Emma thought for a moment. What would Great-Aunt Margaret want us to do? Sarah looked back at the journal, at 52 years of careful documentation. Margaret had spent her entire adult life recovering these pieces, protecting them, waiting for the right moment to bring them into the light. Maybe this was that moment. Maybe an 8-year-old girl finding the vault wasn't an accident. Maybe it was exactly what Margaret had hoped for. Someone innocent enough to see clearly, brave enough to act. She'd want us to do the right thing, Sarah said finally. Even if it's hard, even if it's dangerous. Then that's what we'll do. Sarah pulled Emma into a hug, this fierce, brilliant child who saw the world in such clear terms. Right and wrong, truth and lies, justice and corruption, no grey areas, just the simple belief that good could triumph if you were brave enough to fight for it. Okay, Sarah said, pulling back to look her daughter in the eye. We're going to document everything properly. Every piece, every story, every family it belongs to. And then we're going to hold a press conference and tell the world exactly what we found and what we're going to do about it. Morrison, who'd been listening, nodded. I can help facilitate that. The Bureau can provide security, legal protection, media coordination. There's something else, Emma said quietly. She'd been flipping through Margaret's journal again. Great-Aunt Margaret wrote about a safe deposit box at a bank in Manhattan. She said it contained copies of everything, all her documentation, all her authentication papers, all her correspondence with governments and museums. She said it was her insurance, in case anything happened to the vault. Do you have the key? Morrison asked. Emma shook her head, but she wrote the bank name and box number. She showed them the page. Box 347 at Manhattan First Trust. Morrison pulled out her phone. I'll get a warrant. If those documents exist, they could be crucial for the restitution process. As the chaos swirled around them, FBI agents securing the property, lawyers debating jurisdiction, reporters gathering at the property line, Sarah and Emma sat together in the vault one more time. They'd been photographing and cataloguing for days now, each painting properly documented, each artifact measured and researched, each piece of jewelry sketched and described. The work was painstaking, but important. "Mama," Emma said, standing in front of a portrait of a young woman holding a violin. The plaque read, "Rachel Goldstein, age 16, painted by her father, David Goldstein, 1941. Recovered Amsterdam, 2007. "What is it?" "This girl. She was our age. Well, older than me, but she was young, and someone loved her enough to paint her picture, and then everything was taken from her." Sarah knelt beside Emma. "I know, baby. All of these pieces, they're not just art. They're people. They're families. They're love and loss and survival." "Yes. Then we have to make sure they get home, no matter what." Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady beat of her heart. This 8-year-old who'd broken the rules and found the truth. This child who somehow understood what mattered more than any adult in the room. "We will," Sarah promised. "Together, we will." And in that moment, sitting in the golden light of the vault, surrounded by centuries of human tragedy and triumph, Sarah finally understood what Margaret had known all along. The collection wasn't about money. It wasn't about prestige or ownership or even justice in the legal sense. It was about remembering, about honoring the people who'd lost everything, about making sure their stories, their art, their love survived even when they couldn't. That was worth fighting for. That was worth any risk. The path ahead would be complicated. There would be more threats, more legal battles, more people trying to exploit the situation for profit or power. But Sarah and Emma would face it together, guided by Margaret's example and their own moral compass. The vault had been opened. The secret was out. And now began the long, difficult work of setting things right. The press conference took place on a cold morning in November, 3 weeks after Emma had opened the basement door. Sarah stood at a podium set up in front of Hollowcrest Manor, Emma beside her, while dozens of cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Agent Morrison stood to her left, a lawyer from the Justice Department to her right. Behind them, the mansion loomed like a silent witness to everything that was about to change. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded her prepared statement. She'd rewritten it 7 times, trying to find words that would honor Margaret's legacy while protecting everyone involved. In the end, she'd decided to simply tell the truth. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she began, her voice carrying across the lawn. 3 months ago, my daughter Emma and I inherited this property from my great-aunt, Margaret Foster. What we discovered here has the power to reunite families with lost heritage, to fill gaps in art history, and to bring closure to decades of questions about missing cultural treasures. She paused, looking down at Emma, who squeezed her hand. "My great-aunt spent 52 years recovering stolen and lost artwork from around the world. She worked with governments, museums, and private investigators to track down pieces that had been taken during wars by thieves or through corruption. What she found, she protected here, in a vault beneath this house, because the legal complications of returning them were too complex, too dangerous to navigate alone." The reporters erupted with questions. Sarah raised her hand for silence. "Today, I'm announcing the establishment of the Margaret Foster Foundation for Art Recovery and Restitution. Working with international authorities, legitimate museums, and cultural heritage organizations, we will properly authenticate, research, and return every piece in this collection to its rightful owners or their descendants. This process will take years. It will be complicated, but it's the right thing to do." "How much is the collection worth?" someone shouted. "The estimated value is $295 million, but that number is meaningless. These pieces represent human lives, family histories, cultural heritage. They're priceless in the truest sense of the word. Will you profit from this?" Sarah had known this question was coming. "Any pieces that cannot be returned due to lack of living heirs or impossibly complex legal situations will be sold through proper channels, with proceeds split between the Foundation's operating costs and cultural heritage preservation programs. I will not personally profit from stolen art. Neither will my daughter. That's not what Margaret would have wanted, and it's not what we want." "Are you in danger?" another reporter called. "We've heard about threats, break-ins." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "We've been threatened. Our home was broken into. We believe my great-aunt may have been murdered to prevent her from going public with this collection. But that's exactly why we're standing here today. Silence protects criminals. Truth protects everyone else." Emma stepped forward to the microphone. Sarah started to stop her, but Morrison touched her arm, shook her head. "Let her speak." "My name is Emma. I'm 8 years old. I'm the one who found the basement." Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "I was told not to go down there, but I did anyway because I was curious. And what I found wasn't just treasure. It was stories. Stories about families who lost everything. Stories about people who survived terrible things. Stories that needed to be told." She looked directly at the cameras. "If you have a family member who lost art during the war or during any conflict, please contact the foundation. We have documentation for everything. We want to help you find what was taken from you. That's what my great-aunt Margaret wanted. That's what we're going to do." The questions continued for another hour, but the message was clear. The vault was open, the secret was public, and there was no going back. Within 24 hours, the Foundation's temporary email inbox had over 3,000 messages. People from around the world reaching out with stories of lost family heirlooms, missing paintings, stolen artifacts. Each message represented a life disrupted, a history fractured, a hope that maybe, finally, something could be recovered. Sarah hired a team. Art historians, genealogists, lawyers specializing in cultural property law, researchers fluent in dozens of languages. They set up operations in the mansion's East Wing, turning Margaret's library into a command center. The FBI provided security. International agencies sent liaisons. And slowly, piece by piece, the work began. The first return happened 2 weeks later. Rebecca Hoffman, the woman who'd followed them in the SUV, stood in the vault with tears streaming down her face as she looked at her grandmother's paintings for the first time. "She was so talented," Rebecca whispered, reaching out to touch the frame, but not quite daring to make contact. The Nazis told her she couldn't paint anymore because she was Jewish. They took everything from her studio. We thought it was all destroyed. Sarah stood beside her, Emma on her other side. Margaret found these in a private collection in Austria. The owner had purchased them legitimately in 1973, but the provenance was forged. Margaret traced them back to your grandmother through bills of sale she found in Vienna's archives. Can I take them home?" "Yes, they're yours. They always were. We're just the ones returning them." Rebecca collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Her daughter, who'd come with her, wrapped her arms around her mother. And Sarah felt something in her chest loosen, the first glimmer that maybe this impossible task was actually possible. Maybe Margaret's dream of returning these pieces wasn't naive. Maybe it could really happen. The second return was harder. A Greek delegation arrived representing the government in Athens. They came with lawyers, documentation, and stern faces. But when Agent Morrison led them down to the vault and showed them the ancient pottery, the marble statues, the bronze vessels that had been looted from archaeological sites over the past 50 years, even the lawyers grew quiet. "These pieces are part of our national heritage," the lead delegate said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought they were lost to black market dealers forever, scattered across private collections where we'd never find them." Margaret catalogued where each piece came from, Sarah explained, showing them the documentation. Original excavation sites, dates they were stolen, chains of custody. Everything you need to authenticate them and return them to proper museums. "Your great-aunt performed a service to the world," the delegate said, shaking Sarah's hand. "Our nation is in her debt, and yours." The returns continued. A Polish family received back a Chopin manuscript stolen by the Nazis. An Iraqi museum reclaimed Mesopotamian tablets that had been smuggled out during the 2003 invasion. A French collector's heir was reunited with Impressionist paintings taken during the German occupation of Paris in World War II. Each return was documented, photographed, and shared with the media. The Foundation's work became international news. Lost art returns home after decades. Private hoard becomes public good. Margaret Foster's legacy, reuniting families with lost treasures. But not every case was straightforward. Some pieces had competing claims. Multiple families insisted the same painting belonged to their ancestors. Multiple countries claimed the same archaeological artifact. Those cases went to arbitration, to international courts, to mediation. Sarah learned to navigate impossible situations. A painting claimed by both a Holocaust survivor's family and a museum that had purchased it in good faith from a reputable dealer in 1965. How do you decide who deserves it more? We follow the evidence, Emma said one evening as they pored over provenance documents. At 8 years old, she'd become remarkably good at reading authentication papers and tracing ownership chains. We find out who owned it first, before it was stolen. That's who it belongs to. But the museum paid for it legitimately. They didn't know it was stolen. Then we find a way for both sides to be okay. Maybe the family donates it to the museum, but the museum has to display a plaque explaining the real history. Maybe the museum compensates the family. Maybe they share custody, but we tell the truth, always. Sarah looked at her daughter with something like awe. When had Emma become so wise? The work was exhausting. 18-hour days sorting through claims, authenticating documents, coordinating with international agencies. Sarah lost weight, stopped sleeping well, lived on coffee and determination. But there were moments of pure joy, like when they returned a violin to the grandson of a Jewish musician who'd been murdered at Auschwitz. The man played it right there in the vault, his fingers shaking, tears running down his face as he drew out notes that hadn't been heard in 80 years. Or when a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor named Ruth Steinberg flew from Tel Aviv to see a painting her mother had created in 1938. Ruth had been 6 when her family was taken to the camps. She'd survived. Her mother hadn't. And for 86 years, she'd thought every trace of her mother's artistic work had been destroyed. "I didn't know any of her paintings survived," Ruth whispered, standing before a portrait of a young girl, Ruth herself, playing in a garden. "I barely remembered her face, but I remember this day. I remember the garden. I remember her painting me." She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the canvas. "Mama," she said softly, "I kept my promise. I survived. I had children and grandchildren. I told them about you. And now they can see what you created. They can know you were real." Sarah had to leave the room. She found Emma in the hallway, also crying. "It's good crying," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Right, Mama? This is the good kind." "Yes, baby. This is the very best kind." The foundation grew. Sarah negotiated with museums, governments, private collectors. Some pieces could be sold legally, items whose original owners had no living heirs, or situations where the legal owner chose to sell and donate proceeds to the foundation. Those sales brought in money, significant money. $42 million over the first year, more than enough to fund the foundation's operations, establish an endowment, and create programs to help other families search for lost heritage. Sarah took a small salary, enough to support herself and Emma modestly. The rest went to the mission. Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity, the 8-year-old who'd discovered the vault. News outlets wanted interviews. Schools invited her to speak. She handled it all with remarkable poise, always bringing the focus back to the families who'd lost so much. "I was just curious," she'd say. "But the real heroes are the people who survived terrible things and never gave up hope of finding what was taken from them." And Great-Aunt Margaret, who spent her whole life protecting these pieces so they could go home. On Emma's 9th birthday, the Foundation's board of directors voted unanimously to make her the youngest board member in the organization's history. She took the responsibility seriously, attending meetings, reading reports, asking questions that often cut straight to the heart of complicated issues. "Why can't we just give it back?" she'd ask, when lawyers started talking about jurisdictional complications. "Because the law says, but morally, who does it belong to? Let's start there." More often than not, that simple question led to solutions everyone could accept. The death threats slowed as the Foundation's work became public. It was hard to threaten people who were constantly in the spotlight, surrounded by federal agents, celebrated by international media. The criminal networks that had wanted to keep the collection secret began to fracture under FBI investigation. Markus Volkov was arrested trying to bribe a customs official to smuggle out pieces he'd stolen from a museum in Prague. 2 other collectors were charged with conspiracy. A government official who'd been taking bribes to ignore smuggling operations resigned in disgrace. The network Margaret had feared began to collapse, exposed by the very publicity Sarah and Emma had courted. Silence had protected criminals. Truth destroyed them. 6 months into the Foundation's work, Thomas Gray appeared at the door one evening. Sarah had been so busy she'd barely spoken to him since the press conference. She felt guilty about that. He'd been Margaret's friend, had helped her when she'd first arrived. "Thomas, I'm sorry I haven't—" He held up a hand. "I didn't come for apologies. I came to tell you something I should have told you months ago." They sat in the library, Emma joining them with her ever-present notebook. "I wasn't just Margaret's friend," Thomas said heavily. "I was her partner in the recovery work. For 30 years I helped her track down pieces, authenticate them, negotiate purchases. I was the one who built this vault, who helped her transport pieces here, who kept her secrets." Sarah stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if people knew I was involved, they'd come after me too. Afraid I couldn't protect you the way I'd failed to protect Margaret." His voice broke. "She was murdered, Sarah. I'm certain of it now, and I should have done more to stop it." "Tell me about her," Emma said softly. "Tell me about Great-Aunt Margaret. What was she really like?" Thomas smiled through his tears. "She was fierce, brilliant, stubborn as hell. She spoke 9 languages. Could authenticate a painting just by looking at the brushstrokes. Had contacts in every major museum and police force in the world." He pulled out his wallet and showed them a photo. Margaret in her 50s, standing in front of the Louvre, grinning like she'd just pulled off the heist of the century. She'd been an art history professor before she started recovery work, lost her position when she refused to authenticate a forgery for a wealthy donor. After that, she went independent, started tracking down stolen pieces on her own. "Why?" Sarah asked. Her father was a Holocaust survivor, lost his entire family, including a sister who'd been a talented painter. Every piece of his sister's work was destroyed. Margaret grew up hearing about what had been lost. She made it her mission to make sure other families didn't lose their heritage the same way. He told them stories late into the night. Margaret negotiating with Russian oligarchs. Margaret sneaking into private auctions to track down suspicious pieces. Margaret testifying before international courts about the illegal art trade. "She saved hundreds of pieces over her lifetime," Thomas said. "But she couldn't save them all. That's what haunted her in the end. All the pieces still out there, still lost, still waiting to be found." "Then we'll keep looking," Emma said firmly. "We'll finish what she started." Thomas looked at this 9-year-old with tears in his eyes. "Margaret would have loved you, would have been so proud." As the Foundation's work continued, they began converting the mansion itself into something new. Not just offices, but a museum, a research center, a place where people could come to learn about cultural heritage, art recovery, the importance of preserving history. The vault became a rotating exhibition space. Pieces waiting to be returned were displayed with their full histories. Who'd created them, who'd owned them, how they'd been lost, how Margaret had found them. Visitors walked through and saw not just art, but human stories. The mansion's grounds were opened to the public. School groups came for field trips. Researchers used the library Margaret had built. The Foundation offered classes in art authentication, cultural property law, genealogical research. Hollowcrest Manor, once a lonely mansion holding dark secrets, became a beacon of education and justice. The town of Ravenswood changed too. At first, there'd been division. Some residents thought Sarah should donate everything immediately. Others believed she should keep it all, finders keepers. Still others resented the attention, the federal agents, the disruption to their quiet town. But as the returns continued, As families reunited with lost heritage, as the foundation brought jobs and purpose to the area, opinion shifted. The local diner started serving Margaret's Special, a tea and pastry combination the owner swore Margaret had loved. The general store sold postcards featuring the mansion. Children dressed as Margaret for career day at school. The woman who'd been reclusive and strange in life became a hero in death. Her story inspired people. Showed them that one person, working quietly and persistently for decades, could make a real difference in the world. On the one-year anniversary of Emma opening the basement door, the foundation held a gala. 200 people attended, families who'd received items back, museum directors, government officials, donors, volunteers. The event was held in the mansion's ballroom, a space that hadn't seen this much life in decades. Emma, now 9 years old and remarkably poised, gave a speech. "A year ago, I did something I wasn't supposed to do," she began. "I opened a door I'd been told to stay away from, and I know some people think I was wrong to disobey, that warnings exist for good reasons." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "But here's what I learned. Sometimes warnings exist because someone's trying to protect you, and sometimes they exist because someone's trying to hide the truth. Great-Aunt Margaret warned us to stay away because she was trying to protect us from danger. But she also left us a key because she knew that eventually someone had to open that door. Someone had to bring the truth into the light." Sarah watched from the side of the room, heart swelling with pride. "This year, we've returned 83 pieces to their rightful owners," Emma continued. 83 families got back something they thought was lost forever. 83 stories got to be told, and we're just getting started. We have hundreds more pieces to research and return, years of work ahead of us. But every single piece matters, every story matters, every family matters, because art isn't just paint and canvas and stone. Art is memory. Art is love. Art is proof that we were here, that we mattered, that we created something beautiful, even when the world was terrible." She held up a photograph. "This is Hannah Lieberman. She painted portraits in Vienna before World War II. The Nazis took everything from her, but her paintings survived because Great-Aunt Margaret found them and kept them safe. Now Hannah's granddaughter Rebecca has them back. Now Rebecca's children can see what their great-great-grandmother created. Now Hannah's story won't be forgotten." Emma's voice grew stronger. "That's what this work is about, remembering, honoring, making sure that even when people are gone, their stories survive. Great-Aunt Margaret understood that. She spent her whole life fighting to preserve human heritage, and now it's our turn to continue that fight." The room erupted in applause. Sarah found herself crying again, the good kind, as Emma would say. After the gala, after the guests had left and the caterers had cleaned up, Sarah and Emma stood alone in the vault. They'd created a special section now, dedicated to Margaret herself. Her photograph hung on the wall, that picture of her at the Louvre, grinning with triumph. Below it, her journals were displayed in a glass case, open to different pages so visitors could read about her adventures. "Do you think she'd be happy with what we're doing?" Emma asked, looking up at Margaret's portrait. "I think she'd be proud," Sarah said. "I think she'd be amazed at how brave you are." "I'm not brave. I was just curious." "Bravery isn't not being scared, baby. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You've been doing that every day for a year." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I miss her sometimes, even though I never met her. Is that weird?" "No, I miss her too. I think we miss who she was and what she represented. Hope, persistence, the belief that one person can make things better." They stood together in the soft golden light of the vault, surrounded by treasures still waiting to find their way home. The work continued. Years passed. Emma grew from a curious 9-year-old into a thoughtful teenager with a gift for languages and an encyclopedic knowledge of art history. She spent her summers working at the foundation, her school years studying everything she could about cultural heritage, provenance research, and international law. By the time she turned 16, Emma had helped return over 300 pieces to their rightful owners. She'd testified before Congress about the need for stronger cultural property protections. She'd given lectures at universities about the importance of provenance research. She'd become an expert in a field most people spent their entire lives studying. The foundation had grown too. Satellite offices in London, Paris, Jerusalem, Buenos Aires, partnerships with museums and universities worldwide. A database of stolen art that law enforcement agencies around the globe relied on. Margaret's dream of creating a proper system for returning lost cultural heritage had become reality. And Hollowcrest Manor stood at the center of it all, no longer a dark mansion hiding secrets, but a bright beacon of justice and remembrance. On a bright Saturday afternoon in spring, Emma stood in what had once been the vault's main chamber, now a museum gallery, leading a tour for a group of high school students. At 16, she looked remarkably like the portrait of young Margaret that hung in the foundation's entrance hall. Same determined eyes, same intelligent expression, same sense of purpose. This space used to be completely hidden, Emma explained, gesturing around the beautiful gallery with its carefully lit displays and explanatory placards. My great-great-aunt Margaret built it to protect these pieces until they could be safely returned. She worked in secret for over 50 years. A student raised her hand. Why didn't she just call the police? Because it wasn't that simple. Many of these pieces were tangled up in complicated legal situations. The current owners had often purchased them legitimately, not knowing they'd been stolen decades earlier. Returning them meant potentially prosecuting innocent people or causing international incidents. Margaret was trying to find a way to do the right thing without causing more harm. So what changed? Emma smiled. I opened a door I wasn't supposed to open. I was 8 years old and too curious for my own good. I found the vault, and that started a chain of events that led to the foundation, the returns, everything you see here today. Another student spoke up. Do you regret it? Finding all this? Your life must have been so much simpler before. Emma considered the question carefully. Simple isn't always better. Yes, our lives got more complicated. We faced danger, threats, legal battles. My mum and I had to make really hard choices. But we also got to help reunite hundreds of families with lost treasures. We got to honor my great-great-aunt's legacy. We got to be part of something that actually mattered. How could I regret that? She led them through the gallery, showing them pieces that were temporarily displayed before being returned. A Renaissance painting recovered from a private collector in Switzerland, ancient jewelry from Egypt waiting to be sent back to Cairo, a sculpture stolen from a church in Poland during World War II. Each piece had a full display explaining its history, its journey, how Margaret had found it, and where it would eventually go. The foundation had made transparency its highest value. No more secrets, no more shadows, everything out in the open where it belonged. After the tour ended, Emma found her mother in the foundation's main office, reviewing authentication papers for a Monet that had just been verified as original. How'd the tour go? Sarah asked, looking up from her work. Good. Smart kids. Asked good questions. Emma sat on the edge of the desk. One of them asked if I regretted finding the vault. What did you tell them? That I don't. That it was hard but worth it. Sarah studied her daughter's face. At 16, Emma had already lived through more stress and responsibility than most adults experienced in a lifetime. Sometimes Sarah felt guilty about that, about the childhood lost to board meetings and legal depositions and media interviews. Do you really not regret it? Sarah asked quietly. Or is that just what you tell people? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I'd never found that key. If we'd just sold the house and moved away. We'd probably be living in some apartment somewhere. You'd be working at a law firm. I'd be a normal kid worrying about homework and friends and all that regular stuff. But I wouldn't have gotten to meet Rebecca and see her cry when she saw her grandmother's paintings. I wouldn't have met Ruth Steinberg, who survived the Holocaust and got to see her mother's art one more time before she died. I wouldn't have helped return a stolen Torah to a synagogue in Prague. I wouldn't know that one person, even a kid, can actually make a difference in the world. Emma looked at her mother. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm glad I was curious. I'm glad I broke the rules. Because sometimes the rules are wrong. and sometimes the only way to make things right is to be brave enough to break them. Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know, Mama." That evening, they held a small private ceremony in the mansion's garden. It was the 5-year anniversary of Emma opening the basement door, and the foundation's board had decided to honor the occasion by unveiling a statue. The statue was bronze, life-sized, depicting Margaret Foster in her prime, dressed in travel clothes, a worn bag over her shoulder, holding a journal in one hand and looking forward with determination. The sculptor had captured something essential about Margaret: her strength, her purpose, her refusal to accept that lost things had to stay lost. Thomas Gray, now in his 80s but still sharp, gave a brief speech. "Margaret Foster was my friend, my partner, and one of the most remarkable people I've ever known. She believed that art belonged to everyone, not just the wealthy collectors who could afford to buy it. She believed that cultural heritage should be protected and preserved, not hoarded in private vaults or sold to the highest bidder. And she believed that one person, working quietly and persistently, could change the world." He paused, looking at Sarah and Emma. She was right. These two women, one who inherited her mission and one who discovered it, have proven that Margaret's dream was possible. They've returned countless pieces to their rightful owners. They've brought closure to families who thought they'd never recover what was lost. They've exposed criminal networks and corrupt dealers. They've made the world a little bit more just. So today, we honor Margaret Foster not just for what she did, but for what she inspired others to do, for the legacy she left behind, for the path she cleared so others could follow. He pulled a cord and a cloth fell away, revealing the statue. In the fading light, bronze Margaret seemed almost alive, her expression captured perfectly, serious but hopeful, determined but compassionate. At the base of the statue, a plaque read, "Margaret Foster, 1931 to 2024. She spent her life recovering what was lost and protecting what was found. Her legacy continues through all who believe that art, memory, and justice belong to everyone." Sarah and Emma stood before the statue as guests mingled in the garden, sipping wine and sharing stories of Margaret's adventures. The sun set behind the mansion, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "She changed our lives," Emma said softly. "We changed our own lives," Sarah corrected gently. "Margaret gave us the opportunity, but you're the one who had the courage to walk through that door. And I'm the one who chose to honor her mission instead of taking the easy way out. Do you think she's watching somehow, seeing all this?" Sarah looked up at the mansion, at the lights glowing warmly in the windows, at the people gathered in the garden. Holocaust survivors, museum directors, recovered art owners, foundation staff, all brought together by Margaret's work and their own commitment to continuing it. "I think if there's any justice in the universe," Sarah said, "then yes, she's watching, and she's proud." As the evening deepened and stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Emma wandered back into the mansion. She found herself drawn, as she often was, down to what had once been the vault. It was still used for temporary storage and display, but it had been transformed. Where once there had been shadows and secrets, now there was light and openness. Where once treasures had been hidden away, now they were shared with the world, if only temporarily before finding their way home. Emma stood in front of a new arrival, a painting that had just been authenticated the week before. It showed a family gathered around a dinner table, faces lit by candlelight, everyone smiling. The plaque read, "Sabbath Dinner, Rachel Weisz, 1936, recovered Berlin, 2029, awaiting return to the Weisz family descendants in New York." In a few weeks, this painting would go home. A family would be reunited with a piece of their history they thought was lost forever. They'd see their great-great-grandmother's work, see the faces of ancestors they'd only known through stories, see proof that their family had existed, had created beauty, had survived. That's what all of this was really about, Emma realized. Not the money or the fame or even the justice, important as those things were. It was about memory, about making sure that people who'd been erased by violence or time or hatred could be remembered, about proving that love and creativity and human connection were stronger than any force that tried to destroy them.
"Emma,"
Her mother's voice called from upstairs.
"are you down there?"
Yeah, Mama, coming. But before she left, Emma touched the frame of the painting gently. You're going home soon, she whispered. We'll make sure you get there. Then she turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, leaving the vault behind her. It no longer held secrets. It no longer needed to. The truth was out in the world now, doing the work Margaret had always dreamed it could do. And as Emma emerged into the warm lit hallway where her mother waited, she understood something profound. Some warnings exist to protect secrets, but some warnings exist to protect the people brave enough to reveal them. Margaret's warning had been both, an attempt to shield them from danger and a challenge to be courageous enough to face it anyway. Emma had accepted that challenge. She'd opened the door. She'd found the truth. And in doing so, she'd discovered something more valuable than $295 million in art. She'd discovered who she was meant to be. Sarah took Emma's hand as they walked together toward the front of the mansion, where guests were beginning to leave. Through the tall windows, they could see the bronze statue of Margaret, illuminated now by carefully placed lights, standing guard over the garden like a sentinel watching over all she'd protected for so long. "Mama," Emma said, "when I'm older, when I'm done with school and everything, I want to keep doing this work, not just for the foundation, but everywhere. I want to help other countries set up their own recovery programs. I want to train new specialists. I want to make sure what Great-Aunt Margaret started never stops." Sarah smiled, though her eyes glistened with tears. "I know you will, baby. You've already done more than most people accomplish in a lifetime. I can't wait to see what you'll do with the rest of yours." They stood together at the doorway, looking out at the mansion that had changed their lives, at the foundation that had grown from one little girl's curiosity and one woman's 52-year mission. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be more complicated cases, more legal battles, more pieces to track down and return. But that was okay, because they'd learned something important over these 5 years. The work of justice is never finished. The work of remembering is never done. The work of making the world a little bit better requires persistence, courage, and the willingness to open doors that others say should stay closed. Margaret Foster had spent her life opening those doors. Now Sarah and Emma would spend theirs keeping them open, letting light shine into dark places, bringing lost things home, and proving that sometimes the smallest act of courage, an 8-year-old girl turning a brass key in a lock, can change countless lives. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to open the door that everyone else is too afraid to touch. As the last guests departed and the evening settled into quiet peace, Sarah and Emma returned one final time to the gallery. They stood before Margaret's portrait, this woman they'd never met, but who'd shaped their entire lives, and offered a silent thank you for the warning that became a challenge, for the burden that became a purpose, for the secrets that became a beacon of hope for families around the world. The 8-year-old girl who'd been told not to enter the basement had grown into a 16-year-old woman who'd helped return hundreds of pieces to their rightful homes. The struggling single mother who'd inherited an impossible choice had become the director of one of the world's most respected cultural heritage foundations. And the reclusive woman who'd spent 52 years protecting treasures in silence had finally received the recognition she deserved, not as a hoarder or thief, but as a guardian of memory, a protector of heritage, and a hero who proved that doing the right thing is always worth the cost. The basement door that Margaret had warned them away from was now a threshold that thousands of people crossed each year, students, scholars, survivors, families, all coming to learn, to remember, to honor what had been lost and found again. Because some doors are meant to be opened, some secrets are meant to be shared, and some little girls are meant to change the world. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe courage and curiosity can change everything.